Hey folks, welcome to the TV Dudes podcast. This is Les, and today we've got a treat for fans of cult musicals and sharp satire. We're celebrating the 25th anniversary of Reefer Madness the musical, a hilariously over-the-top send-up of the 1930s anti-marijuana propaganda film. The show first hit the stage in 1998, blending dark comedy, catchy songs, and biting social commentary, and it went on to inspire a star-studded 2005 film adaptation. Joining me today are the brilliant minds behind it all, Kevin Murphy and Dan Studney. Kevin is a prolific writer and lyricist, known for his work on Desperate Housewives and Heathers the musical. Dan is an accomplished writer and composer, with credits that include Jack the Giant Slayer and a range of film and TV projects. Together, they crafted Reefer Madness into the cult sensation it is today, and now they're back to talk about the newly released 25th anniversary cast recording. We're diving into the show's origins, its journey to cult status, and what makes this new recording special, so stick around.
Hi, Les.
Hello! Thank you so much for making time. I really appreciate it. Hopefully everybody can hear me.
It's our pleasure.
All right, so I've got Kevin.
Hello, this is Dan.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you both so much. I'm really excited to talk to you both because the Showtime version of the show that most of us probably got to see was hilarious, and I was interested to know how you got to that point, then now to the LA 25-year cast recording. But also, I really can't think of many things in society alongside all of the changes we've experienced in our lives that has changed quite as much as public perception of weed. And I was a little interested on how the show is translated over 25 years and what it was like adding material, tweaking it. So can we start out just discussing a little bit of how your collaboration started? That was in college. Is that correct?
Yeah, we started in college, and I was a freshman and Dan was a sophomore. And I wanted to write musicals because I realized I was a terrible actor. And Dan had written and produced a show that got done at our school. And so I figured, okay, that's a guy that can actually get musicals made. So I went to him with a modest proposal to adapt Antigone into a musical, and we ended up doing it.
So it started. It was a rock opera, at least in the sense that it was through song.
That's what to say when this guy just comes up to you on the quad and is like, Antigone, let's do it.
Yeah, he not only Greek, but yeah, he was also more focused on the ennui version from the 50s, was it, Kevin?
From the 40s.
40s, yeah.
There was a French playwright who wrote a version of Antigone during the occupation in World War II, and it was basically a thinly veiled critique of fascism, and he, by doing it about Antigone, which was an ancient Greek story, he was able to kind of get away with criticizing French people who were getting too cozy with the Nazis.
Very much like Arthur Miller of him. Very, very crucible.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's something that stage
And
theater
not that different
always.
from Reefer Madness.
Well, I was just thinking in terms of critiquing something. Reefer Madness is so absurd to watch the 30s original now, but it was done like a chick tract, just completely sincere. I feel like, at least in the 30s, and to take it and satire it. Can you talk a little bit about what you wanted to get out of that project initially when you were like, we're going to do a piss take of Reefer Madness, of this 30s, I don't know, driving a driver's ed film almost, but anti-weed?
Well, when we started off, it was just kind of a fun idea, because one of the things that's really important for any successful musical is you need a love story at the center, and it needs to be hugely heightened emotionally, because that's why the characters make a choice to sing. And Reefer Madness kind of ticks all of those boxes, while also being kind of this ridiculous subject matter, would make it hopefully funny.
I think also it's just on a personal level, Kevin and I wrote, I don't know how many musicals and TV musicals and things, projects together. with that, when we decided to do this, we were like, well, we have to watch this over and over and over and over again. So what's something that would be fun to watch over and over and over again? We've come a long way since Antigone and Sophocles.
But one of the things that really helped us was we tried really, as we learned more about it, we learned that the movie itself wasn't simply a driver's ed movie, that the movie was actually, indirectly subsidized by people in the federal government who wanted to use exploitation to try to put in the zeitgeist that weed was very, very dangerous. So it became what quickly interested us was much less dealing with the marijuana of it all and dealing with the idea of disinformation and people standing behind a podium, standing in front of a flag, holding up a Bible, trying to convince for their own financial ends, which they don't necessarily disclose to you when they're telling you what to do. And they use fear as their biggest weapon. You'll see it today with the new administration in the White House. It's fear and racism. And, yeah, absolutely, and race baiting, and ultimately that keeps the show fresh. And I think that's over 25 years we've been able to kind of pivot and adjust the show to kind of reflect what's going on in the world around the people who come to see the show.
Yeah, we've never specifically, against any administration or any kind of thing. Like we've never, I think when we first started, it wasn't Clinton in office. I mean, yeah, I think so. Yeah. Anyway, it was, as it moves forward up to where we are now, it just becomes I think increasingly clearer what we were getting at 25 years ago. So it becomes more. So it's not just the marijuana being legal, cannabis being legal, that is interesting to us. It's also the underlying politics.
I think there's something interesting about a disinformation campaign adapting as the underlying message has gotten harder to sell. I live in Texas, and I think a lot of folks are always surprised to note that every statute about cannabis in the Texas state law is spelled with the H, marijuana, so that you can know exactly who they were targeting when they wrote those laws. And it wasn't a plant, it was brown folks.
Wow.
And so, watching the underlying societal vibe of it, there's no sneaking away from the party anymore. Everybody seems to have a vape everywhere. And yet there's still a disinformation campaign where we'll just adapt and scare in a new way. Putting on the program 25 years later, did you want to take something out? Did you want to add something to? What was the most interesting tweak you made to it?
I think for me, it was how little we had to change, because when we were doing the original production, it was happening when Bill Clinton was happening and Monica Lewinsky and all of that stuff, and the demonization of Monica Lewinsky, which was horrible, and certainly the Democrats were very guilty of doing that, on top of other stuff. And then when we were doing the movie in 2005-ish, we were coming on the tail end of the Bush era, and there was a whole different bunch of misinformation to react to, which was how we got into the war in Iraq and other stuff. And then when we revived it in 2024, there was a whole new bunch of things that people were lying to the public about and trying to terrify the people about. And it feels like it's something that it's a very, very well-worn playbook. And I think that by encouraging people to laugh at how ridiculous it was in the 1930s, it's fun, but it also helps train you to sort of recognize the patterns that are going on around you when you see the show in 2024. So, I mean, the weird thing is, for me, is how much the show hadn't dated and how little we actually had to change.
For me, there's two things for me. One was that I feel like we're in a much more ADHD TikTok like scroll through time period, generationally, and I feel like one of the things that was very interesting and fun to do, and I think very successful, was to pare it down to a lean mean 90 minutes and just cut all the fat out of it. You just can't. You just it goes from you're like a pinball in a pinball machine. You're just bouncing from, Jesus to the Brownie song to the orgy to this, that, and the other thing. And it's like it happens so fast that I think it doesn't test anybody's attention span. And that was uniquely different about this production. And then, and I guess this is just me speaking as a composer. It also was very fun for me to revisit all the orchestrations of the show and to kick it into a more contemporary place in some cases and just make it just. I don't know. This is my favorite version of that.
I can't think of very many other screenwriters don't necessarily have screenwriting partners, though a lot do. Novelists, I feel like hardly ever, unless you're James Patterson. But musicals were always the guys I knew in college who were in pairs, always. It always seemed to be, a book and music. Can you talk a little bit about what's special about musicals in terms of collaboration?
I think one feeds the other in the sense that we're trained as television writers and we became really good at it because writing for musical theater taught us to work within the context of a team. And I think that the more we worked in television, the better we got at writing musicals because both are disciplines that require more than one set of eyes on something. And as much as the composer and the lyricist work together to create something that feels seamless and create the illusion that it was made by one brain. You also have that with a scenic designer. You also have that with the director, that when we present Reefer Madness, you're not looking at Dan's music or Kevin's lyrics. You're looking at the entire experience as being presented by a group of artists together, and not one has dominance over the other. And I think that's I don't know if that's why it is. I think it's probably because musicals are really frigging hard and it's a very rare person that can do all of it by themselves. Those people exist, but they're like unicorns.
Yeah. I mean, and you also, I mean, while it is that collaborative, you also have a chance. I think I've done a lot of work in movies recently, and you have much more of a chance in the theater as an author to have your say, to not always to get your way, but to almost control your output more than you do in such a big machine on like some of the movies and TV shows. Just more.
Yeah, like nobody with Reefer Madness can come up to us and expect any success and saying, you know what, this might be a little more commercial if you, spoiler alert, didn't kill Mary. Maybe we let her live and, well, that's not really the story we want to tell. We'd rather tell a story where we kill Mary and then bring her back out of nowhere at the end of the play because you're looking at how ham-handed the lecturer is with his manipulation of the story that he's telling, and use it for humor and to make a larger point.
Which is not to say that the input isn't asked for and listened to. I mean, I'll give you an example. In this last production, we put 2 new songs in, one of which is quite one of my favorite songs we've ever done. And I think it was like the first weekend. I think it was Nav Campbell, and I certainly know it was Kristen Bell, and they were like, I think that once those 2 songs are slowing down the action and whatever. And as hard as it was to cut something that was my favorite song, Kevin and I were taught long ago that musical theater is about killing your babies. If it doesn't serve the whole, you might have the best song in the world.
It was also the songs we ended up cutting were the 2 brand new songs that we wrote for this production. And I guess as Kristen Bell said, when we were like sort of griping about that, she's like, all right, well, blame you for getting it right the first time, huh?
I would think, unlike television or movies, particularly this production, gets performed around the country. There have been other production companies, community theaters. You guys saw the Canadian premiere. Can you talk a little bit about what the experience is of not just watching your own work up on stage, but watching a production that you didn't necessarily weren't there to run? Or
I don't go to them often, and when I do, unless I know somebody and I'm never going to get away with sneaking in. I usually will go. I won't tell anyone I'm there, and then I'll leave.
I go to a lot of them, and over the years in multiple countries. One of my favorite ones was at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which I think necessarily had to be down to a 60-minute, maybe, I don't know, 60, 90 minutes is their format and whatever. I find it endlessly fascinating, and sometimes disturbing, and and occasionally enlightening as we move forward to go like, oh, they did that. That was cool. We did a diagnostic production of it in New Jersey the year before last, that a friend of mine directed, and it was really useful in terms of like trying out some of the new orchestrations in front of an actual audience in New Jersey.
In terms of just being an artist and going back to previous work, have there been things that you listen back on this now and think, okay, yes, obviously it was a classic. It helped us. We won an Emmy. Also, if I had to do it again now, I would never do it that way. Young me was a fool. Do you find yourself wanting to change things for style?
I think for style, there are sometimes jokes of which I am not proud. And I feel that I've maybe like grown beyond some of the jokes.
And then until people force Kevin to put them back in the show.
Yeah.
Which happens on several occasions.
And sometimes you question. I think that one of the things that we've done is in 1999, we were able to lampoon the lecturer's innate racism by having him really explicitly refer to race in a way that we could still probably get away with in 2024, but we don't want to, because some of the racial content that was in the 1999 version of the show hits people in such a cringy way today that it pulls you out of the show, and you're not laughing at stuff that was there. So even stuff that Alan Cumming had like an extended monologue outside the Five and Dime in the movie about jazz musicians, and it explicitly talks about race, and we actually see a black jazz musician playing the saxophone on camera, and we see a white woman ripping off her shirt in Forbidden Ecstasy, which would not have been out of place in one of those movies from the 30s, but that was removed, and the racial content's still there, but we've relegated it to dog whistles, just so the audience that's there live having the experience doesn't suddenly feel uncomfortable. It doesn't feel squirmy. Also, we want to be considerate to the actors that have to perform this, because we're basically saying, okay, wonderful actor who's playing the lecturer, you're playing a horrible, monstrous racist who's written a horrible, monstrous, racially tinged play, and all of you actors, you have to go out there and you have to sell this horrible, racially tinged play to a 2024 audience. And I think it's incumbent upon the writer of the play to make sure that you're putting your performers, your artists, in a safe context in which to do that, so that they're not going to end up feeling awful or feeling weird or feeling, compromised.
I think also a friend of mine, Jane Marie Higgins Williams, now she used to say to us, with limitations comes freedom, and as a sideways thought to that, it by putting ourselves in that box and going like, okay, we're not going to do that, I find it much more disturbing, because we all know what he's talking about. We all know what that lecturer is talking about. And the fact that he doesn't say it, and his communication is to his base, I find that so true and terrifying, and much more rewarding than, going for the obvious racist joke, racially tinged joke. I find it.
It's also more real. Like on the day, this will date the recording of this, but on the morning that we're recording this conversation, was when the helicopter hit the airplane over Washington D.C., and the first thing that came from the the current White House administration was that it's Biden's fault because of DEI and because they complained about the FAA being too white.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're not coming out and saying that, well, if you're not white, you just may be incompetent.
But
Yes.
it does when you put it that way. It does to me sound like we're showing much more. We're showing more restraint.
Well, yeah.
Right. Right. Well,
When we did the last production of this, we did think he was going to win.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot to be said for recalibrating to meet your audience at where we are societally on understanding certain issues. There's things that 20 years ago you probably would have had to like overtly shake me to like, hey, that gay person's having a hard time over there. And like, it's 1992. I don't know that would have jumped out as much as it would in 2024 now. And so you might not have to shake an audience quite as hard for them to be shook.
I think that's very true.
When it comes to productions like Legally Blonde the musical, or I mean Heathers the musical has so much darkness to it. It's Heathers. But when it comes to things that didn't stem from a political fear-mongering campaign, what generally draws you? What do you feel like your style is when you go, that's a musical we want to do?
Well, I think the Dan's Litmus is a great one. What's a musical that I'm not going to want to like open a vein if I have to see it for the 50th time? And I think that's really important. I also think that a musical can take up to 10 years to actually get it to see the light of day. And then your reward for having a success is then you have to curate it for the next 30 years after that with new casts and making sure that everything's being done properly and making sure that, you nourish, the legacy of the show. And if you're going to spend that much time with something, you've got to have a point. Like there's been a couple of musicals that went on to be large moneymakers that I was invited to work on, and I watched like the source material, and at the end of the day, I didn't see a reason for it to be a musical, and I didn't see what I could add that would make it any better than what the source material was, and that's when I usually say no to something. And when I get excited and I'm like, oh, we could take what this is and build by doing this and this and this and make it into something even cooler or even more of itself than the original. That for me is the sweet spot.
Those while I have a great deal of respect for a lot, I used to musical direct things like My Fair Lady and all the classics and being things like The King and I and whatever. I have great respect for all of them. But the things that excited me more than anything growing up were the ones that were edgier or different or were doing something. My favorite musical is Evita. Who would think that the wife of an Argentine dictator who sleeps her way to the top and dies, it would make for such a great and witty and interesting musical. I love things like that, and Jesus Christ Superstar from that same team. I think Reefer Madness owes a huge debt of gratitude to Little Shop of Horrors and Rocky Horror and things like that. So so for me, it's like I want to do those things that excite me in some way that moves the form forward or is just using it in a clever way. I think those things are fun to me and interesting, and I don't really have much of an interest in necessarily doing stuff that's a little bit more traditional, if that makes any sense.
I think the other thing for me is I also love doing shows that are not incredibly difficult to produce, because one of the greatest pleasures of doing Reefer Madness or doing Heathers or whatever is that people do the show, that people license the show and they do their own version of it. Because my gateway to loving musical theater was when my high school and local community theater group would do obscure shows like Runaways or famous shows like South Pacific and Grease. And the friendships that I made doing those shows were really, really significant. And when I was, kind of a nerdy high school kid, having that outlet was really, really important. And the one thing I remember is that when we were doing a show, there was nothing more important in my young life than everything that was connected to that show and the people in that show. And being able to have, earn a living sort of by creating that for new young people coming up behind me is an enormous pleasure.
I also like the idea that it's especially in the case of Reefer Madness that sometimes we call it humorously a gateway musical. I think there's a lot of people out there whose knee-jerk reaction is like, musicals, I hate musicals. I don't want to go see it. And I guess there is always something in the back of my brain just nestled behind my eyeballs going like, well, what if I convinced some of those people that musicals were cool, that musicals weren't what they thought they were, and they would come here and they would have a good time and expand the musical theater fan base, I guess. I don't know. I'll admit to liking that Reefer Madness is that. And and I do write stuff with an eye towards that.
First musical's free. That's great.
Yes.
Thank you both so much for talking to me about it all today. Of course, the Reefer Madness new Los Angeles cast recording, I believe, was out the 24th, so just a few days ago. And it looks like it'll be on vinyl, I think, in the next year. We'll look into that.
It's going to be on vinyl this year. Yeah, we're working on the colors, and hopefully we can do green vinyl with red blood splatters is our platonic ideal.
That's great. Yeah. That's great. I don't know when colored vinyl started and where that was when I was a kid, but it's the coolest now.
It's awesome.
Thank you both so much. I had a great time talking to you.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.